Hi all, hope you're all well. I wanted to talk a bit more about firearms law and the UK, and the latest news that I've just read is that firearms owners are being drug swiped by the police. And if you don't know what that is, you might be aware that you can now be drug swiped in a vehicle. So if you're driving down the road and you're driving erratically, the police could pull you over, for example, ask you to take a breathalyzer for alcohol. Everyone's used to that. But one of the other things they will now commonly do is ask you to take a mouth swab, which basically tests you for THC, which is a component in cannabis. And they will also test you for cocaine, I believe, but definitely cannabis. And it does this by basically swabbing the inside of your mouth. And if you've got any trace of that substance in there, the drug swab will pick it up when it reacts in a chemical mixture. Now, that's normally done for people that are suspected of driving drunk or under the influence of drugs. And when you get a driving license, you're fully signing up to the fact that you're, going to surrender some of your rights, that if you get pulled over, you basically cannot refuse one of these swab tests or breathalyzers without having the force of the law thrown upon you. So you can refuse, but if you do that, it's very likely then you're going to lose your license, because refusal is actually against the law and has repercussions. And if you're a sports person, that could also happen, that you might sign up for doing a competitive sport of some kind. And part of that sign up, the small print, if you read it, if you were a boxer, for example, it would say you would be willing to have random drug tests, and they would go a step further and maybe blood test you or urine test you to make sure you didn't have any banned substances in your blood. And that's part of the sort of contract you sign with that athletics body or whatever organisation it is you're doing for sport. Now, it's a little bit different for firearms owners, because we didn't sign up to any of that. We signed up for the law as it was written at the time, and any later amendments that have since come out, and new regulations, Home Office guidance, etc. And none of those things mention random visits from the police to give you a drug test. So I'm a bit displeased about that, to hear about it happening. It's been happening. I think the Cumbrian police have been doing that. They've been around to 4 or 5 different addresses, and I think 3 people have lost their firearms license in that process, 2 of which lost it because they failed a drug swipe, and 1 of which that had incorrectly stored firearms, and then I think another 2, nothing happened to them. Now, I would caveat this by saying that in that story, it's important to note the police were acting on evidence or intelligence, I think they said, that they had received. So, that's a little bit different, maybe, that they've got direct intelligence that someone is up to no good and committing criminal activity. But that still isn't the normal way that you would act on intelligence. If you believe someone was partaking in criminal activity, you wouldn't normally go and knock on their front door and ask them to pass a drugs test. You would probably monitor them, surveil them, see what they were doing, try and catch them in the act, and then present that evidence to get them charged with something. That would be the norm. So this isn't even the norm when it comes to, acting on intelligence received. And I wouldn't have a problem per se if this was brought in the correct manner. So if the police said, right, we're issuing new guidance, it's nationwide, we've decided that obviously we don't want people that are out of their heads on drugs to have access to firearms. I think we would all agree that's probably a sensible decision. And to prevent that from happening, we're going to be enacting these random tests. And when you sign up for your firearms license, in part, you will be signing up for the fact that you may be randomly tested. I wouldn't have an issue with that, because, that can already happen to me when I'm driving down the road. The police can pull me over, make me have a test, and I can't really do much about that. And that's fine. I signed up for that. And I don't have a problem with them coming to my house and asking me to do a drugs test because I'm a firearms license holder. None at all. But I do have a problem with them doing that via the back door and not putting that through as a proper procedure and not making firearms owners aware of that. Because if you're not aware of it, you can't get legal advice on it beforehand. You're unsure of what's going on. And there's some other issues with this, is that those swab tests are not 100% accurate. So if you're someone that, for example, uses a CBD compound, you might have injuries from sport. I know a lot of athletes that use CBD. I know a lot of people that have, sleep disorders and whatever that use CBD. It's a very well tolerated substance. It's perfectly legal. You can buy it in all the supermarkets. It's no different to buying vitamins or anything like that. But it does have a very small amount of THC in it as a sort of residual amount. But apparently that can be enough to trigger these swabs off. If you've just consumed a CBD product and then the police were to knock on your door and say, hey, we're going to drug swab you, you could in effect fail that swab because of something perfectly legal that you've done. So I don't think that's great. And there's a number of other things that also contain a small amount of THC, which are in fairly common use. Hemp oils, I've used hemp oil in cooking and salad dressings and things. That can have a small amount in it. Milled hemp seeds, I put that in my porridge sometimes. So now I'm kind of concerned that that could flag up as a false positive. There's hemp protein powder, which I've used in the past. I don't particularly like it. It's a bit sort of grainy tasting. It's not particularly nice, but a lot of people use it, especially if they're vegan or vegetarian, and it's supposed to have a lot of health benefits. Again, can have a small amount of THC in it. So you can see there's a number of factors that could negatively impact you having this unknown test that suddenly turns up at your door. People won't know if it's not in the procedure and they haven't had a chance to get legal advice or medical advice or scientific advice, and then they're just caught off guard and someone says, right, do this test. If they suddenly fail that test, they're not going to have any information to put across to the police and say, hey, I've just consumed, half a pint of hemp protein or whatever. Whereas if you had that information beforehand, you might actually be able to tell the police before they even administered the test, I've just taken this, it may have a small trace of THC in it. It's perfectly legal, but I'm warning you that could have some sort of influence on this test you're about to administer. And what happens when these people have failed the test? Well, the police revoke their firearms license and take their firearms off them. And it's going to take those people, if that's incorrect and they've actually done nothing wrong, it's going to take them a very large amount of money and a long time fighting in the courts with a solicitor to get their firearms license back, and they're always going to have that as a kind of black mark against their name. That seems to be how the police like to operate. If you clear your name and show that you're not guilty of something, it seems to hover there in the background in a kind of intelligence file or some sort of internal message system to flag you up as being problematic, which of course isn't true if you're not guilty and you haven't done anything. So I've got a number of issues with this policy if it's starting to be rolled out nationwide. So far, it's only been one county. And as I said, they were saying that they were acting on intelligence. But I just don't think that that's the correct way of going about it. I think that they need to issue a nationwide announcement that that's going to be their policy going forwards. And then people have the right to look into it, to research that scientifically, to take legal advice. And they also have the right to surrender their firearms and firearms licenses because they may not wish to be swab tested at their doorstep. They might feel that's an invasion of their privacy and they don't want that to be happening, which is their right. We should all know what we're signing up to before we've signed up for it. The police are doing this because firearms law stipulates in the UK that the firearms license holder must be a responsible citizen, that doesn't abuse alcohol or do any illegal things. And that's in itself a good thing. I've got no issue with that. I have a big issue with the context of the alcohol there, because it seems to me that as long as you're not a blatant alcoholic and you're not falling down drunk every damn day and someone hasn't reported you in for, being unconsciously drunk all the time, it's absolutely acceptable to be a firearms license holder and drink large quantities of alcohol. No one seems to be complaining about that, obviously, because it's legal. But if you actually think about the way that these substances work, let's talk about driving, for example. What's more dangerous? Someone who's had 10 pints of beer driving a car or someone who's smoked a joint. I know which one is far more dangerous. I'm way more concerned about the guy that's driving at 80 miles an hour erratically down the road thinking he's a Formula One driver and driving aggressively. I'm not so concerned about the guy parked up eating cookies in a lay-by and giggling with his mate and then driving home at 25 miles an hour in a sort of slightly anxious state. They're two very different things, and I think one represents in scientific manner a very serious concern, which is the alcohol. I certainly don't want to be around people that are wielding guns and they've had a lot to drink. That's the last thing I'd want to do. Equally, I don't want to be around people wielding guns that have taken drugs, but I actually think if I had to pick the two, if they said there's two options, you can go with that guy who's wielding a gun and he's had 10 pints of beer, or you can go with that guy who's wielding a gun and he smoked a joint, I would definitely go with the guy that smoked a joint, because I think he would represent less danger to me. I think he's much less likely to accidentally shoot me or to become aggressive and try and kill me. When I worked in security, I dealt with both of those type of people. I dealt with a lot of very drunk people and a lot of very stoned people. And the drunk people used to batter each other, attempt to kill me, and basically act in the most depraved ways possible. And the guys that were stoned used to sit around quietly and almost fall asleep. So they didn't really represent an issue to me. Sometimes they might try and steal your cookies if you had any. So that's obviously a worry. But I know that's straying from the legal terms because one's clearly illegal and one isn't. And, we can talk all day about whether we think that one should be illegal and one shouldn't, and vice versa. I also wonder where this will end because, if this kind of stuff gets brought in and there's no legislation in place and no one's been warned about it and it's just the police have felt like this is something they can do, what would be next? Because if we're supposed to be responsible members of society, could the police then decide they're going to come round and look at my internet browser history and see what I've been looking at and say, well, this guy spends a lot of time looking at pornography when he should be working. So we don't think that's a very responsible and good member of society. We're going to take his firearms license off him. Or this person has these political viewpoints and they're not the political viewpoints that we personally agree with. We're woke and left wing. This person seems to support some quite right wing policies. We don't like that. We don't think that's a reasonable and responsible person. We're going to take their firearms license off them. So those obviously aren't happening right now, but my argument would be that that's the kind of thicker end of the wedge. If you start here and say we're going to let the police make up their own rules about what constitutes a reasonable member of society in terms of someone who can have a firearms license, that over time will only grow wider and they can start to open the net further and further to basically capture everyone and say, we don't think any of you are reasonable and responsible members of society. I'm not suggesting that is what's happening. What I'm saying is that could happen if we're not kind of keeping an eye on this stuff being brought in the back door right now. So if the police are watching, which I'm sure they do watch some of these videos, I would implore you guys to actually bring this in as policy. I don't think you'll find any license holders that don't agree. All holders, if you said to them, in theory, would you agree that drugs testing firearms license holders is a reasonable request in the UK? They're going to say, yeah, we find that okay. But if you're going to just bring that in one force only and it's just because they've decided it that week, I think a lot of people are going to have some issues with that because it clearly needs to be bought in properly, not just bought in, randomly in one force. Guys, leave a comment down below. I hope that's given everyone some food for thought. These are just discussions to get people thinking and get people talking. You know, some of this is my opinion. Some of it's based on facts that have actually happened on reality. But, you know, keep the comments nice. We're not here to kind of berate anyone. I don't want this to turn into like a big slanging match against the police or anything like that. I also understand that they do a difficult job. I'm a little bit disappointed with some of the stuff they're doing, quite a lot of the stuff they're doing. I'm personally disappointed with that. I also have a lot of respect for some of the stuff they do because they do a very difficult job and they don't get paid very much money for it. So I'm kind of stuck in the middle there. I'm not completely saying I have huge issues with them, but I'm certainly saying that there is room for improvement in some of the work they're doing. Thanks for listening. I hope you all enjoyed that. Have a fantastic weekend if this is your Friday night like it is mine. And I will talk to you very soon.